Good morning. This is Mama from 1 Acre at a Time. Today we are going to be freezing some of our potatoes that we harvested about 2 weeks ago from the garden. We had planted some red potatoes, Yukon potatoes, and plain old russet potatoes. These are your Yukons and your russet, and I have the red potatoes over here that I've already started on. And so when we pulled these, we brushed off some of the dirt, checked for any ones that weren't good or had bad spots on them, and then we put them in a dark, cool room for 14 days because you want to give them time to cure. So what we're going to do is I'm doing some Yukons here, and so I'm going to be cutting these up into cube size. That way I can just pull them right out of the freezer and put them in either my stews or fry them or mash them up or whatever I want to use them for. And so we're going to just simply, and I got my strainer here to go from here to the hot boiling water. This is just seasoned water here. A little bit of salt, hot water, because you're going to want to blanch your potatoes before you put them in the freezer. So what we're going to do is we're going to dice up a couple Yukons. Make sure they're clean. I always set mine in cold water here just to make sure all the grime and dirt is off of them. And we like big cubes, so I'm just going to cut them in half and then in thirds. You can cut whatever size you want. These will blanch for 3 minutes. And then if you do really big cubes, if you're doing like a stew or something like that in the crock pot, you're going to want to blanch those for 5 minutes. You do not have to peel them if you don't want to. We prefer the skins on, so I leave the skins on. Skins are full of vitamins and iron, so it's good for you. And we're just going to dice them up. I try and do in small batches, that way I don't get too much cut up in that because they will turn brown if they sit out for too long. And so we're just slice them up. If they're bigger, you might have to do several more slices. If they're small, you just might have to quarter it. And these all were in the garden this year, so we had a pretty good crop of potatoes. But I think I might have to double the amount of potatoes I plant just because of the size of our family. That way we can make sure we have enough for a year. I know you can pressure can potatoes, and red potatoes, white potatoes, Yukons, things like that are best for canning. I'm not a big fan of that because I don't like my potatoes mushy. So if you know of a way to can them without them being mushy, I'd love to hear it. And so I'm just going to do a big old batch of this real quick based on how much we would need per serving. If I'm doing a big pot of something, I can always bring out 2 packages. And so all we're going to do, and again, that's just seasoned water, plain old salt and hot water for blanching. And then you got a bowl of cold water there, ice water there. That way when you take it out of that hot water, it will stop the cooking process. And so that would probably be about the right size for our family. Of course, you're going to adjust it to the size of your family. I always have at least 6 people here at all times for supper. Sometimes more, depending on whether the grandbabies are here or not. And you can even slice some of these and dehydrate them for scalloped potatoes inside for the winter months. You can make French fries out of them. You can do just about anything you want that you normally would do for potatoes. So all I'm going to do is kick up the heat here a little bit. That way we can kind of get that boiling going. I didn't do it this time, but if you're going to be boiling something, if you take a little bit of oil and you rub that edge around your potato, it helps with the boil over. So that will help you from making a big old mess on your stove. These have been sitting in ice water for a while, so I'm going to be taking those out. And after I put them in ice water, I always put them in a colander in the freezer for 5 minutes or so, just to make sure that I'm getting the cooking process to stop. So these are those red potatoes, and so I put them on a parchment paper wax pan and a clean dish towel. And I just dry them to the best I can, and then we'll size them up for the packaging, because I'll put them in a food saver bags, baking steel bags, and then label them and put them in the freezer. So we'll be setting those just right there for right now until I can get them all the way dried, and then we'll wind up packaging them up. So we're going to take them right from this ice water. You do have to add ice to your bowl out through several times, depending on how many batches you're doing, to stop that cooking process. And these were blanched for 3 minutes because they're less than 2 inches size. And drain off as much water as possible. And then we'll put these ones in the freezer. That way I make sure I definitely stop that cooking process. And by doing this blanch process, I think it takes out a lot of the starch. Because we don't like a whole lot of starch on our potatoes, so we'll cook them and rinse them and then cook them again. And so we're going to stick these in the freezer, let them cool down a little more to stop that cooking process. And I'll usually leave it in the freezer just for 5-10 minutes or so, just to stop that cooking process, to make sure it's stopped. And then we're going to take our Yukons here. I'm going to load this little strainer up. And we're going to put them down in that water. You want to be careful because that is hot water. Try not to splash yourself because it's hot. And then you can either fry them up or air fry them or saute them or put them in a crock pot or stew or whatever you want to do. And I would recommend doing small batches. That way if you need to stop, you can. So, there we go. And when that starts to boil, I'll start that 3 minutes, because blanching doesn't start until it's actually boiling. And then we just start doing the next batch. And we're going to do the same process as we just did. You can peel them, but I don't. And when you're cutting these up, you want to just double check your potatoes, and because you always miss one that's either got a flaw or a bruised mark or a spot on it that doesn't look very pleasing, like this one here. That there is just from coming out of the garden. So I'll cut it out because I don't want that in my potatoes. And you can make them as big as you want, as small as you want. My grandson loves loaded potatoes. When we make like mashed potatoes, he likes it with a little bit of sour cream and cheese and bacon with some green onion that I always have growing up here. Just in case you didn't know, if you buy green onion from the store and you bring them home and you clean them up, and so they won't go bad in your refrigerator, you can just put them in a jar with a little bit of water, and they'll continue to grow for weeks and weeks and weeks. So you can use that same bundle of green onions that you bought for up to about 8 weeks, I think, because it just continues to grow, and you just cut off how much you need. Just in case someone didn't know that. So you pay $75 to $1 for a bundle, and you have green onions for weeks. And I'll probably take some of these Yukons, since we got quite a bit of them this year, and I'll probably slice them up. That way, when we want to do homemade scallops, we just pull them out of the freezer and put them in the pan and let them cook. And you can do that the same way with your Idaho potatoes, your plain old regular brown potatoes. Slice them up, put them on the dehydrator, and then after they're done drying, you just put them in a sealed container and let them be. And when you need them, you just pull them out and cook with them, just like you would any other time. Because when you're cooking, they will absorb that water again to make them just like the day you put them in that bag. Okay, so it started boiling, so I'm going to set that timer for 3 minutes. And this also helps get rid of any bacteria or anything that's on the potato, because you don't want to wash your potatoes. You never want to wash your potatoes directly right out of the ground. You want them to cure first. And then even then, you don't want to wash them until you go to use them. So you could just simply brush as much of the dirt off as possible and set it aside.
How long do they have to cure for?
14 days. I try and do a little longer because we're in hot heat, so I try and keep my potatoes in a dark, cool room.
And how long does it take for the potatoes to grow if someone was to start a garden and didn't know?
Approximately 120 days. But it's all going to depend on the potato that you're using, so just make sure you read your package. One thing with growing potatoes is you don't want to waterlog them. They don't like sitting in water. Here a couple weeks ago, we had made a video, and we just posted it here a day or two ago, about one of our failures in one of my containers with potatoes. Excuse me. So, and I think I didn't have enough drainage in my container, so I'm going to have Papa drill some more drainage in that container, and we're going to try it again. And so I think they got waterlogged, and then they rotted out and got mushy, and that was one of our failures. Here on 1 Acre at a Time, we like to show y'all our successes and our failures, because we only learn by failures. It's been really hot here in Blanket, Texas. We've been hitting about 100 degrees and higher. So today's been a little cool this morning. And we got some rain this morning that we really needed, especially for those gardens. Our garden is just about came to an end. All we got out there left now is some cantaloupe and a couple watermelons, I believe, still left. And but the rest of it, we've already done harvest most of it, and it's already been put in the freezer. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get some stuff in for fall gardening after the heat. So, but if you're starting a fall garden, right now is the time to start those seeds. That way when it gets cool down, the end of September, 1st of October, you can put those plants in the ground because they like the cooler weather. And if you do stew and you like round potatoes in your stews and that, you can save these little potatoes like this and just roast them. Put them in with your whatever. You can roast them or put them in your crock pot. They work really well. So we're going to start removing these potatoes because it's been 3 minutes, and pop them right down into that ice water. Remember, you'll have to add ice to that as you go along. That way that water stays cold. I always find it a little easier, especially if I know I'm going to be blanching a lot of stuff, like potatoes or green beans or something, to get yourself, I know all these refrigerators, fancy refrigerators nowadays, has got the automatic ice machine on them, but I find it just easier to get some ice trays, the old time ice trays, start making some ice, dumping them out in the bowl. That way when you're doing this, you have plenty of ice to make sure you have plenty of ice water to stop that process of cooking. And you let it sit in there and let them stop that process. Then wind up filling those up and get the nose ready again. And just move those potatoes around. Make sure they're getting cold. And if you have to, remove some of that water and throw some cold water in there. Okay, we'll go remove this from the heat a little bit. Since we know that's hot and good and boiling, I'm going to load my strainer up again here. And we're going to put that next batch in there. Again, this is 3 minutes. If you do much bigger than a 2x2 cube or slice, you're going to want to blanch those for 5 minutes. So we're going to pop those down in there. And again, you're going to want to work in batches based on your family size. And we're going to put those back on there. Wait for that boil to come up again. When that boil starts again, we're going to blanch them for 3 minutes. Okay, so when you, last note, when you're doing potatoes, whether they're baby reds, Yukons, Idaho potatoes, brown potatoes, white potatoes, when you're growing them young, you want them to cure for 14 days in a cool, dark room. Don't wash them. The sink, you're going to rinse them and clean them really good. Get all the sand or dirt or whatever you got on them off of them. Cut them to the size that you need or you want for your recipes. Blanch them for 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the size of your potatoes. Water, a bowl of ice water to stop the cooking process. I do that one extra step by putting it in the freezer for 5-10 minutes. Put them on a tray, make sure they're really dry, and then we're going to vacuum seal ours, but you can put them in the freezer, 1 gallon bag, either quart size bag, or whatever size you need for your family size. You don't have to use a vacuum sealer. You just want to make sure that they're really dry if you're going to use a baggie, because if not, you'll get them white crystals on your potatoes and they won't last as long. So again, just make sure they're dry. Take your towel and move them around. That way you get as much water off them as possible. And bag up, and then you got potatoes for all year long. Thank you all. Have a good day.